All right, jumping right in with a deep dive. You all requested the Sri Lankan Civil War. And I gotta say, those Wikipedia excerpts are pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Just trying to grasp the scale of it all.
hmm
They mentioned the death toll estimates ranging, what, from 70,000 to over 100,000?
Yeah, it's hard to even fathom. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when you think about the long-term consequences for Sri Lanka.
Exactly. So we're going beyond the surface here. How did something this devastating actually unfold?
Well, you're right to think it goes way beyond Sri Lanka itself. It becomes a case study in how like colonial legacies, ethnic tensions, even well-intentioned policies, they can spiral into something truly tragic.
And we often hear that simplified narrative, right? Sinhalese versus Tamil. But the source points out that it misses a lot of the nuance. They mention Christians, Muslims, Malayalas caught in the crossfire too.
Absolutely. The whole Sinhalese versus Tamil thing ignores the complex makeup of different regions. Like, take the eastern province, you had a significant Tamil population, sure, but also a sizable Muslim and Sinhalese presence. So it's not just two sides, it's this web of tensions, right?
Right. So how does British colonialism, which ended in 48, factor into a war erupting decades later? Seems almost too distant to be relevant.
See, that's the thing about history, assuming it stays in the past. The British, besides wanting Ceylon's resources, they didn't just bring in Tamil laborers, they put them in specific positions of power, the civil service, for instance.
Interesting.
And that seemingly small thing, it created ripples for generations.
Which brings us to the standardization policy of the 70s. On the surface, it sounds like a good thing, boosting rural Sinhalese representation in universities, a step towards equality.
Except it kind of backfired, because by setting higher standards for Tamil students, especially in fields like medicine, it became a system rigged against them. We see this throughout history, aims for one outcome gets a whole other unintended consequence.
And that resentment, especially among younger Tamils, that's where groups like the LTTE take root.
And their rise is fascinating. They weren't the only Tamil militant group, not at first, but they pushed this one voice idea, kind of like how the PLO did, the Palestine Liberation Organization. It makes you think about that challenge a lot of movements face, presenting a united front, even if it means, well, ruthlessness.
So the LTTE, they wanted to be the voice of the Tamil people, even if it meant taking power through force.
Exactly. And that strategy, while effective in some ways, it foreshadowed the brutal turn the conflict would take.
And as we get into the 1980s, things really escalate. One event that's always stuck with me, the burning of the Jaffna Library in 81.
Oh, yeah.
A cultural institution, just gone.
Yeah.
Over 90,000 volumes. Some irreplaceable. It's like that quote where they burn books.
They will ultimately burn people.
Yeah.
It's a chilling parallel, and sadly relevant here. For Tamils, that wasn't just about books. It was their history, their identity going up in smoke.
And after something like that.
Support for separatism, it skyrocketed. Makes sense though, right? When a community feels its existence is threatened, it pushes people to extremes.
It's impossible to talk about this conflict without the external factors. The source lists India, Pakistan, the U.S., even the U.K. getting involved.
Right, which blows that whole good versus bad thing out of the water. Like, look at India. They were all in on the Tamil cause at first, then Rajiv Gandhi's assassination. By the LTTE, everything changed.
Just goes to show allegiances on the world stage.
Shift quickly.
Yeah, and more often driven by politics than any real morality.
It's tragic. And the human cost of it all, immense. You get into the 90s, Eelam War II, it was brutal. We hear about the government's death squads, but the LTTE did horrific things too.
In what way?
The expulsion of Muslims from the north in 1990. Over 72,000 people.
I have to admit I wasn't familiar with that. It gets overshadowed, I guess.
By all the other horrors, yeah. But it shows how widespread the violence became. Not just battles, it was in every corner of life. We can't forget that human element amidst all the strategy and politics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even with all that going on, there were attempts at peace. The 2002 ceasefire, brokered by Norway, was that ever going to work, or was it doomed from the start?
It's tricky. The ceasefire did some good flights to Jaffna, came back, the A9 highway reopened. First time in years people could travel through the Vanni region like normal, but it was built on this foundation of mistrust. The LTTE, they kept a tight grip, still collecting taxes, building their forces, even using child soldiers. And on the Sinhalese side, hardliners saw it as weakness, giving in to terrorists.
So it's fragile.
Very much so. Almost guaranteed another conflict would break out.
Which brings us to 2006, Eelam War 4.
Yeah.
And the trigger? This thing I'd never heard of, the Mayville-Aru water dispute. How does a local water issue blow up into a full-blown war?
Well, Mabel Aru, it was like a microcosm of everything going on. Sinhalese, Tamil, Muslim communities, all depending on the same water. So when the LTTE shut off the water to government areas,
Oh, wow.
it wasn't just about irrigation anymore.
It was a power play.
Exactly. And the government saw it as an attack, a reason to restart the fighting. And from there, well, it was a rapid downward spiral.
And those final years of the war.
Yeah.
Brutal doesn't even cover it. The government's going all out to end things, but the article mentions safe zones being shelled, huge civilian casualties. It's like, did they even care anymore?
Yeah. It's a tragic thing. You see it a lot in these conflicts. When one side senses the end is near, it gets desperate. The LTTE was using civilians as shields, horrific, but the government, it's like that desire to just be done overshadowed everything, both sides in those last months. Hard to even comprehend.
And the legacy of it all, that's what's hit me reading this. Hundreds of thousands displaced, the economic cost, billions, they're still clearing landmines. How does a country even recover from that?
It's a massive undertaking, that's for sure. And it goes beyond just roads and buildings, right? It's that rebuilding of trust, healing those divisions that go back decades. Sri Lanka's finding out it's not easy and it's painful.
They mentioned investigations into war crimes, which makes sense, but also attempts to rewrite history, downplay what happened, even deny it. Makes you wonder if true reconciliation is even possible when you can't even acknowledge the past.
That's the big question, isn't it? Can you move on without looking back? Can there be forgiveness without someone saying, yeah, we messed up? Sri Lanka right now, it's at a crossroads. Some think bearing it all is the only way to peace. Others want justice, a reckoning.
It shows that peace isn't just the guns going silent. It's this whole long process, right? Healing, truth, coming to terms with the bad stuff. And Sri Lanka, they're not there yet, not by a long shot.
No, they're not. And this deep dive, yeah, it's about Sri Lanka, but it also says something about conflict itself, you know, how easy it is to cross that line, how quickly it gets out of control, and how damn hard it is to truly fix things afterwards. It's a reminder for all of us that peace is something you got to work at constantly. It's about understanding, not demonizing, even when it's hard.
So to everyone listening, if you take one thing away from this deep dive, it's this. Don't just passively accept what you hear. Seek out those voices who lived through it, the ones often ignored. This was just a starting point. Hopefully it made you curious, made you want to learn more. Keep asking questions, keep that memory alive, because the Sri Lankan Civil War, those victims, they deserve that much.